brothers and sisters. Good morning, everyone. We will continue studying Genesis this morning. We need to study chapter 23. What does chapter 23 talk about? It talks about the field of Machpelah. At that time, Sarah died. She lived to be 100. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. When Sarah died, Abraham had a sorrowful matter. The matter of sorrow was where Sarah's burial place should be. At that time, Abraham approached the local Hittites, bought a plot of land for a grave. He paid 400 shekels of silver for a burial site, called the Cave of Machpelah. There he bought a field, and the cave within the field, thus that field and the cave in it, for Abraham, family burial place. So Sarah was buried there. It is quite remarkable. Why did they pay 400 shekels of silver for the burial site? Because it corresponds to the 400 years during which Abraham's descendants, at the time of Isaac's birth, meaning his descendants would live as foreigners for 400 years. After those 400 years were fulfilled, Abraham's descendants arrived in the land of Canaan. Therefore, these 400 years functioned somewhat like rent. The ownership of this land ultimately belonged to Abraham. But during those 400 years, it did not yet belong to him. Only after the 400 years were completed did it belong to Abraham. Thus, remarkably, they used exactly 400 shekels of silver for that land, precisely 400 shekels. How could it be so precise? The covenant between God the Father and Abraham was for 400 years, meaning that during these 400 years, the land did not belong to Abraham. So he bought that burial plot for 400 shekels of silver. This is the burial site that Abraham purchased for Sarah. Now the Hittites, the local people, wanted to tell Abraham. They said to Abraham, "You may freely bury your dead in any of our burial sites. No one will refuse you. Go ahead and do it." But Abraham insisted on purchasing the burial site. Throughout his life, Abraham had no place to call his own. Even when his beloved wife died, he still had no land to bury her. He didn't even have a foothold. Not even a patch of ground as small as the sole of his foot belonged to Abraham. So he had to use money, silver, to buy that piece of land. This further reveals to us, this event shows us, Abraham originally did not even have a place to set his foot. He didn't even have a burial site, and had to buy one from Gentiles. Yet, who could have known that 400 years later, that very land, and indeed, the land of all 10 nations throughout the entire region of Canaan, belonged to Abraham's descendants? We see Abraham's faith. He insisted on burying his wife in the burial site he had purchased. That is to say, what about his wife? She was buried with him in the Machpelah burial site. This shows us that Abraham and Sarah were waiting for God's promise. They waited fully. If Abraham entered Canaan at age 75, then Abraham waited until Abraham arrived in the land of Canaan at the age of 75. He lived to be 175 years old. But his descendants would not possess this land until 400 years later. In other words, perhaps Abraham wasn't just waiting 400 years. Because when God spoke to Abraham, Abraham was already very old. It's possible that Abraham's descendants, Abraham himself, would have to wait a full 500 years. Because his descendants were in Egypt, counting from that time, it's possible that it was after 500 years that Abraham's descendants finally received that land. This is Abraham. Abraham, by faith, had to wait a very long time indeed. It's possible that the Hebraic brethren have miscalculated. Then let us examine it according to the 400 years, the period God promised to Abram. That is to say, God made a covenant with Abram for 400 years. Bought that plot of land for a burial site for 400 shekels of silver. We see that Abram had faith. He firmly believed and insisted on burying her in that place, meaning he trusted that the land would surely belong to him in the future. Glory be to the Father and the Lord.